All right, it's time now to talk about 6.3, facilities and environmental conditions. There are many circumstances in which your environment may affect the test results. Okay. So for example, if you're testing a temperature sensor, obviously the temperature of the room or the temperature of your laboratory will affect the results of your test. Okay. So these environmental conditions should be monitored and should be documented, and if needed, correction factors should be applied. So all 6.3 talks about is mostly about the environmental conditions and how these environmental conditions should be documented. And then the facilities, which means basically your lab space, basically tells us that we need sufficient amount of space in our lab to be able to perform the jobs smoothly. Okay, so let's go through these points, see what they're talking about. So 6.3.1, the facilities and environmental conditions shall be suitable for the laboratory activities and shall not adversely affect validity of results. So yeah, basically just like what we said, environmental conditions could directly affect our test results. Okay, so we need to take them and we need to take good care of that. And the facilities, yeah, so your environment, your lab environment should allow a smooth workflow. Okay, so facilities and environmental conditions are important here. Sorry. So the requirements for facilities and environmental conditions necessary for the performance of the laboratory activities should be documented. So in what way the facilities and the environmental conditions can affect your test results, you should document all these factors. You should document all that is associated with this. Okay, and I'll show you guys how we documented this here in our quality manual and quality procedure manual. But first, let's just go through all this. So 6.3.3, the laboratory shall monitor, control, and record environmental conditions. So this is a very important point because here it specifically tells us what to document. So you're documenting the environmental conditions. And environmental conditions can be the temperature, the humidity, can be the noise levels, lots and lots of things in the environmental conditions. So should identify which one of these we should be able to identify which one of these environmental conditions directly affect our test results, and we should be able to document this in our certificates or in our test documents or in our test reports. Okay, in accordance with the relevant specifications, methods, or procedures, or where they influence the validity of results. So now, if you see here, there's a note that says influences that can adversely affect the validity of results can include, okay, but are not limited to. So can include, of course, not in all cases these things affect all devices. That's not the case, but yeah, so they can include these things right here, okay, but they're not limited to this. So it can include microbial contamination, dust, electromagnetic disturbances, radiation, humidity, electrical supply, temperature, sound, and vibration. Okay, and yeah, humidity also. But I forgot on that. Yeah. So let's continue. So obviously, just like we said, laboratory should monitor, control, and record all these environmental conditions. So we're recording this, and we should control these environmental conditions. We should make sure that we control them in a way that doesn't affect our test results anymore, okay? Or the effect is minimal. So measures to control facilities should be implemented, monitored, and periodically reviewed, and shall include, but not limited to, access to and use of area affecting laboratory activities, prevention of contamination, interference, or adverse influences on laboratory activities, effective separation between areas with incompatible laboratory activities. So yeah, so these steps should be applied so that we So you basically make sure that our lab is a place where our environment doesn't affect the test results or the test report. Okay. When laboratory performs laboratory activities at sites, facilities outside its permanent control, shall ensure that the requirements related to facilities and environmental conditions of this document are met. Okay, so obviously, sometimes you might need to do the test outside your laboratory activity, your lab. Sorry. So if you're outside your lab, it's fine. Inside your lab, you've applied um, many steps that will make sure your lab is suitable enough for a test. Okay, but what about if you do this outside your lab? Well, basically you'll have to do everything that you did in your lab outside. You'll have to make sure that your facility still is a good place and you can work in it smoothly. And you'll have to make sure that the environment inside your facility still allows for testing that is not influenced or affected by the environment. Okay. So let's see how these steps are applied. Let's see how 6.3 is applied here. So basically, just like we talked about 6.3.1, the facility's environmental conditions should be suitable for laboratory activities. It's a policy of the laboratory to provide appropriate laboratory facilities, including accommodation and environmental conditions required for calibration, so as to facilitate correct performance of calibrations and tests. Okay. It is ensured that the environmental conditions do not invalidate the results or adversely affect the quality of measurements. Technical requirements of the environmental conditions that can affect the calibration results are documented. Okay, so obviously still some environmental conditions will affect your results, so we need to document that. Okay, and that's because we want to make sure that our customers know that we did the test in environmental conditions that have minimal effect on the test results. Okay, so we can document that and put it in the test report. Okay, the laboratory. So that's 6.2. The requirements for facilities and environmental conditions necessary for the performance of laboratories shall be documented. So just like what we said, we document the environmental conditions that have effect on the test results. Okay. So right now 6.3.3, laboratories shall monitor, control, and record environmental conditions in accordance with relevant specifications, methods, or procedures, or where they influence the validity of the results. Okay, so that's 6.3.3. The laboratory monitor, control, and record environmental conditions like temperature, relative humidity for calibration at its permanent premises as a procedure. 6.3.01. Due attention is paid by laboratory for monitoring and controlling other environmental conditions like sound levels, vibration levels, dust, biological sterility, radiations, and electrical supply, and etc. As appropriate to technical activities concerned. Calibrations are stopped when the environmental conditions are not met. Okay, so these are the sort of tolerances for our environmental conditions. So when we're testing some mechanical devices and mechanical units, these are our environmental conditions. These are basically our temperature and relative humidity tolerances. For thermal, these are again our temperature and relative humidity tolerances, dimension, and then we have for site calibration. Okay. Yeah, and then we have the noise levels, we have the illumination, EN voltage, power supply, and yeah, so all these things should be controlled too. Okay, so these are basically we should meet these conditions. We should meet these conditions while we're testing. Okay, so these are environmental conditions. We should meet all these conditions when we're doing a test. Okay, and that's to make sure that the test is irrelevant of the environment. Okay. Anyways, so let's keep on scrolling. 6.3.4. So measures to control facilities shall be implemented, monitored, and periodically reviewed, and shall include but not limited to. So let's see what here we have for this one. Sufficient space is provided in the laboratory for smooth working. So obviously we need sufficient space in the laboratory, and that's when you talk about facilities. That's directly related to the facilities. So facilities should be quite nice enough for your work to flow smoothly. Okay. For smooth working, no incompatible activities are carried out. Only authorized personnel are allowed to access in the laboratory. Adequate housekeeping and maintaining cleanliness is a part of daily activities of the laboratory. Okay, quite straightforward and nice. Laboratory has permanent calibration facilities at laboratory. Okay, so we give the location and yeah. So here we have a procedure. Okay, the procedure talks about how we do this, how we do the housekeeping, and how we do the how sufficient space is provided, how that one is corrected, and how we make sure that these are met and how we test for them. It's all given in this procedure, how we do that. So let's just real quick just frick an eye on this one. So the procedure is to establish and maintain documented procedure for maintaining the accommodation and environmental facility facilitated as per specific criteria for calibration activity has performed and suspended calibration activity where as the conditions are not met. Okay. Yeah, so obviously these are the environmental conditions that we have, and we need to make sure that while we're doing any test, these conditions are met. And while we're doing the test, the calibration, temperature, and humidity will be recorded in the test report. This is the test report basically. If the environmental conditions is not met specified with the specified condition, the calibration work will be stopped immediately. Okay. So verified environmental conditions like noise levels, illumination, and earth resistance are to be observed in a frequency of once in a year, has to be recorded in the format 6.301. Okay, so basically we have a format, we have a document that we record the environmental conditions like noise levels, illumination, and earth resistances. These obviously we record other stuff too, but that's what is mentioned as a requirement in our quality procedure manual. And yeah, we record these here in 6.3 okay. And obviously these also should meet the requirements that we have here. Okay, should meet these requirements. Yeah, so the laboratory has sufficient, so just like what we said here, so sufficient space is provided. How we make sure that's met. So we have a laboratory has sufficient and separate space for each laboratory to perform their work. Laboratory for smooth working. The laboratory layout has been added in section Annex 6 of quality manuals. Okay, so basically if we scroll down to the Annex section here, we have the layout of our laboratory. Okay, so we make sure that sufficient space is provided for each lab test. Okay, that's how we do this. That's how we make sure that that point is ticked. Okay. The laboratory has already given instruction and the job responsibility for each staff to enter and use of instrument equipment. Only authorized person are allowed to access in laboratory. If outsider customers want to access the laboratory on demand, after approval of head key personnel can access in the permitted area only after signing through confidentiality and impartiality agreement. Okay. So we talked about, we have not talked about 4.1, but that's quite easy. We're going to talk about it in a couple of videos after this one. But yeah, basically talk about the people that goes inside the lab obviously should be trained and qualified. Only they can use the lab activities. because they are also a factor. They can also affect the test results, right? Adequate housekeeping and maintaining cleanliness. Okay, so that's basically housekeeping and cleaning spaces. So that's all related to 6.3. Okay, that's basically 6.3. Quite straightforward and easy to grasp. The important things here are that the laboratory sufficient space, we make sure that we have sufficient space, and we do this by providing a drawing inside our quality manual, okay, a drawing of a laboratory, so that we can prove it that we have sufficient space. And there are environmental conditions that affect our test results. What we do is we record these test results and we put them in the test reports, and make sure that it's always our environmental conditions are always within the given tolerances, okay? And we document the actual environmental conditions in the report, in the test report, okay? And yeah, we carry out some environmental conditions tests, like noise levels. We check what noise level our environmental laboratory is in, illumination and earth resistances and other stuff, obviously, which we have talked about. So our laboratory, basically we test most of these, okay, most of these here, okay. And on top of this, we might check other stuff. And as we're monitoring this, so basically our lab does this in a frequency of once in a year. We record this in a file, in a document that is named 6.3F01. Okay. So yeah, and that's all, to be honest, here. Yep. Thank you. Cheers.